All right, the sermon this morning is entitled Before the End. And before we get to that, though, let's start with a word of prayer. Let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, thank you for this Sabbath day. Thank you for each person here. Thank you for our church. Thank you for your word. Pray that as we spend a few moments here as a church studying the word of God, that you will give us understanding. And as we study these deep things, as we study Matthew 24 and this prophecy here, pray that you will give us understanding, wisdom from on high, that the Holy Spirit will enter our hearts, our minds, that we will be willing to be taught by you, and that we will have a better appreciation of your will for our lives, your love and grace towards us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. This sermon morning may be the most Adventist-coded sermon that I will ever preach. With every sermon, I tried to make it accessible to everyone, whether someone is strong in their faith or weak, whether someone is learned in the scriptures or not. Today, though, I will be talking about something that many Adventists know a lot about. And anyone who is not Adventist has probably never heard of this before. Our church denomination started from an interdenominational movement of Christians who thought that Jesus was returning to earth in their lifetime. They were wrong. Jesus still has not returned 180 years later. However, that first group of Adventists realized why they were wrong. The Bible prophecy outlines some events that had to happen before Jesus returned. Like waymarks along the road, they knew we hadn't quite yet reached the destination. With eager anticipation of Christ's imminent second coming, Adventists have passed on this information, these interpretations of Bible prophecy, from generation to generation. It is our heritage. It is our hope. We know it well. We know it so well that it has become our lingo, our jargon. We leave out the explanatory information when we discuss it because we know what we're talking about. But for those outside of Adventism, this information can be foreign and confusing. Furthermore, 180 years later, some Adventists have begun to stop repeating this prophetic heritage. It's been so long. How many times can someone cry wolf? Maybe we got something wrong. The events that we assume have to take place before Jesus' return seem so fantastical, so unlikely, that they have made us look like fools for almost 2 centuries. And because we've talked about it so long, and talked about it as shorthand with jargon and assumptions in our speech, as a group, many Adventists have become confused on the finer details, and even some of the foundational concepts. So I decided for today's sermon to re-explain the important bits and explain why they matter. For some of you who have been Adventists for decades, or perhaps all your lives, you might be thinking at this point, oh no, not this again. For those of you who have never heard these concepts before, you may be thinking, oh no, what have I got myself into? Please, all I ask is for your patience. I promise to those of you who have heard this information many times, you've probably never heard it explained this way before. And for you who are hearing all of this for the first time, I'm trying to get to the root issues. So I'm leaving out a lot of the finer detail. That would just be very long tangents and get us distracted from the main point. So if you have questions after the sermon, please talk to me or call me or email me or somehow reach out to me. We can talk more. Like I said, this topic has been the fixation of our denomination for almost 2 centuries. And I'm preaching merely the smallest fraction of all of what could and has been developed on this topic. So we can't comprehensively cover the whole subject in one sermon. We could take weeks to discuss this and still not conclude the matter. So again, like I said, this is going to be the most Adventist-coded sermon I probably ever preach. It's going to have a lot of jargon. It's going to have a lot of stuff that I'm not going to explain. If you have questions, talk to me after. Okay, so down to business. What still has to be accomplished before Jesus' second coming? That's the question. That's the question that the early founders of our church were faced with. They thought he was coming, but he didn't. What still has to happen? Before the end, before Jesus returns? Well, the answer is not much. Most of Bible prophecy has been fulfilled already. There are also some things that will happen after Jesus' second coming that is in Bible prophecy, like the millennium, the third coming of Jesus, the great white throne judgment, and hellfire, and making of a new heaven and a new earth. All that, though, is information that is, while it is good to know, doesn't really matter for as much to us, because for those of us who have committed our lives to Christ and surrendered our will to Him, those of us who have washed in the blood of the Lamb, the second coming is the true end of this painful chapter of our lives. When Jesus returns for the second time, there will be the resurrection of the saved and the glorification of our mortal bodies into our immortal bodies. And we will be reunited with Jesus in the clouds, to return with Him to our immortal home, never to be separated again. So the second coming is the culmination of the plan of salvation from our perspective. It is what the Bible calls the blessed hope. As it says in Romans chapter 8, the second coming is what the whole creation looks forward to in eager anticipation. It is why we call ourselves Adventists, looking forward to the second advent of Christ. So again, as Adventists, we eagerly study the prophecies yet to be fulfilled between now and the second coming. And there aren't many. Basically, what is yet to be fulfilled is in the end of Daniel chapter 11 through Daniel 12, parts of Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and Mark 13, they just repeat each other. And the end of Revelation 13 through Revelation 18. That's it. These are the prophecies that have yet to be fulfilled between now and Jesus' second coming. There are a handful of smaller prophecies too, like the second half of Revelation 11. But the list that I just rattled off, what's up here, this is the bulk of it. This is the main stuff. By the way, this is all based on how we interpret Bible prophecy. It's called the historicist interpretation of Bible prophecy. This was the only way that Protestants interpreted Bible prophecy for most of the past 500 years. But in the past 100 years or so, a different way of interpreting, called the futurist interpretation of Bible prophecy, has become wildly popular amongst most Christian denominations. So if what I have said just now, what I'm going to be saying here later in the sermon, seems confusing or wrong to you, that's probably why. You've probably learned the futurist interpretation. Again, this sermon is very Adventist coded. So what does Daniel 11 and 12, Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13, Revelation 13 through 18 say still needs to happen before Jesus returns? Well, it can be summed up in this. There will be a spreading of the gospel to the entire world, coinciding with a uniting of the world against God and His government, followed by a great time of trouble. And that's it. Jesus returns. That's all that's yet to happen. Now, that's not everything that is going to happen. There are things that still will take place between now and then. But this is all that the Bible tells us that we know is prophesied, is predicted, will happen before Jesus returns. So keep in mind that, again, we've been preaching this for almost 2 centuries. A lot has happened in the past centuries. Been the rise of humanism and evolution. There's been Great Depression, Great Wars, World War I and World War II, the Cold War. There's a lot of stuff has happened, but the Bible didn't predict any of that stuff. It predicted that these events would happen, and so we're not given an exact time for any of these. We don't know when these will happen, but know that we are close to the end of time and that this is what has yet to take place. Everything else has already been fulfilled. Now, there's 2 main purposes that I have for this sermon. I'm trying to get to the point right away so you understand what I want you to understand. 2 main takeaways here is, number 1, I want you to have a better understanding of these prophecies. If you've never heard this stuff before, I want to give you that information. Like I said, it's our heritage. It's what we've passed down. So I want to make sure you know it. But 2, and maybe even more importantly, I want to put it in its proper context. Many Adventists have the wrong idea, or maybe the wrong focus, when they consider these prophecies and their what it means for us for the future. And I think because many have the wrong focus, there's a lot of undue heartache and worry and anxiety that comes along with prophecy. So I want to put it in a better context. Anyway, like I said, there's 3 things. The gospel to the whole world, uniting of the world against God and his government, and a great time of trouble. So we're going to start with the first one, the gospel to the whole world. And it's throughout those passages that I mentioned before, but it's mainly found in Revelation 14 and also in Matthew 24 and on Mark 13. I want us to start with Matthew 24. So if you have your Bibles, turn there. Matthew 24. I'm going to start at verse 1. Matthew 24, verse 1. And the context here is that Jesus is in Jerusalem with his disciples, final week before his death, known often as the Passion Week. So it's just a few days before he's going to die. And in the previous chapter, in Matthew 23, he was at the temple, and he was at the temple for the last time. He's leaving the temple for the very last time, and he says in Matthew 23 that he's left the temple desolate because God is leaving the temple for the last time. God is no longer there at the temple. And so he has this great burden. His heart is grieved as he's in this moment. And as he's leaving, the disciples just don't get it at all. They don't read the room. They don't understand that Jesus is hurting here right now. They're too focused on that Jesus was just celebrated, welcomed in here as the new Messiah. They're riding on a colt. They think that he's going to take his place as the rightful king of the Jews. He's going to go conquer the Romans. They're ready. And so they're just in a great excitement. And so as they're leaving the temple, they're like, wow, this is such a beautiful temple. This is the glory and the pride of our people. And they're like, Jesus, don't you see what a wonderful place this is? So in Matthew 24, verse 1, it says, Then Jesus went out, departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, Not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. That really sucks the air out of the room. Disciples are quickly lose their excitement because Jesus here is saying that the temple is going to be destroyed. And this shocks them because in the Jewish mind, Israelite mind, the temple is everything. It's where they worship God, is where they go to meet God. It is the place that is the center of their religion and the place where all the world is to come to worship God. And so in their minds, the destruction of the temple can only mean one thing. It has to be the end of the world. And so they're thinking, Jesus is saying, the end of the world is soon. So in verse 3, it says, now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, so they've left the temple, they left the city, went down and up the valley and onto the Mount of Olives. They're looking across at the temple. The disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Again, they think that the destruction of the temple has to be the end of the world and his second coming of the Messiah. They're wrong because we know they're wrong because we have history. The temple was destroyed in AD 70, almost 2,000 years ago, and it was definitely not the end of the world or Jesus' second coming. We're still around here 2,000 years later. They were wrong. But Jesus, he doesn't correct their mistake. Instead, in his answer to them, he answers both about the destruction of Jerusalem and about the end of the world, treating it as if it is the same event, even though it is not. In other words, the destruction of the Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem is a type or a lesson that we can use to glean about our understanding about the end of the world. There's similarities between the two. So Jesus, he gives them some answers. I'm not going to take the time to read the next few verses, but he tells them that there's going to be many things that are going to happen. There's a lot of bad things that will happen. There's wars and rumors of wars and pestilences and earthquakes and all sorts of terrible things. He says that, but he stresses that those things are not signs of the end. He says that these things will happen. He says, don't worry, not the end. He says that they're just the beginning of sorrows. And again, there were a lot of things that happened between him speaking here in AD 31 to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. There was a lot of bad things that happened at that time. But he was telling them, don't worry, when all these things happen, those aren't signs of the end. The destruction is not yet imminent. And there's been many things that have happened in the past 2,000 years from when Jesus spoke to today. But again, Jesus was saying, you'll see all these things happen. Don't worry, they're not the end. But then we get down to verse 12. And he says, and because lawlessness will abound, love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. Now, I don't think he was saying here that the goal is to make it to the end. In other words, he's talking about 40 years between then and the destruction of Jerusalem. There may be some that were listening to him that day that will die before the temple is destroyed. But also, more importantly, there was 2,000 years between then and now, and we haven't even got to the end of the world yet, even today. And so no one that was listening to Jesus on that day on the Mount of Olives is still alive today, 2,000 years later. He's not saying that you need to make sure that you live that long, but rather what the important bit here is the endurance. He's saying that we need to endure. And that's what's important. Do we stick with God? Do we endure to the end? But he continues. In verse 14, Jesus says, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. And so right here, Jesus here is giving us a sign of the end. This is what you're looking for. And really, I want to stress that this is the sign. This is the most important one. Of the three that I mentioned before, just going back to the slide here, we'll see if this works, George. Maybe it doesn't work. We go back to my previous slide there with the three events. Perfect. Of these three, the important one is the first one. That's the one that Jesus is stressing is the sign of the end. Yes, the other two still have to happen, but Jesus is underlining the first. And I think I'm not at the end of the sermon, but this is one of my most important points here right now. I want you to get this, is that this needs to be our focus. Not the other two. The other two are important. It's still important to know them. But the one that we need to focus on is the first one, because it's in the first one that we know what our job is. It's the first one that is our responsibility, because that's the one that we're involved in. That's the one that we play a part, in sharing the gospel with the world. And so not until the gospel has gone to the whole world will the end come. That is the sign. So has the gospel gone to the whole world? No, it's gotten pretty close, though. It's in almost everywhere in the world. But there's still work to do. And there's still people here in our area, in Stevens Point, who have not heard the gospel. So our work is not yet done. But this needs to be our focus. Anyway, continuing on. The second one, though, second sign, and continue in Matthew 24. It says, Matthew 24, we just read verse 14. Continuing on in verse 15. It says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place." This is still Jesus, right? He's still speaking to his disciples. Just said the sign of the end is the gospel to the whole world. But now he's saying, when you see this abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Stressing, this is important to understand this. It says, "Then let those who are in Judea flee the mountains." Okay, so what is Jesus talking about? Well, he's giving us a clue. He says we need to go back to Daniel. Right? He says there's this term, abomination of desolation. What is he talking about? Well, we go back to Daniel, and the term abomination of desolation is found in a couple places. Daniel. It's mentioned in Daniel 8:14. We know that verse well. But it's also mentioned a couple other places. Mentioned in Daniel 12 as well, the last chapter in Daniel. And this abomination of desolation, it's a sign. It's a sign of something. When they see it, Christians are to act. And again, remember that Jesus here in Matthew 24, he is speaking about the destruction of the temple, but he's also speaking about the end of the world. And so we can learn from what happened in the destruction of the temple to learn what will happen in the future. And the destruction of Jerusalem is just a historical fact. So we can look back at history and learn from it. And so what was this abomination of desolation? Well, the Christians, they had repeated Jesus' words. When Jesus spoke this to his disciples there on the Mount of Olives, it was repeated from generation to generation. You got about 40 years there between Jesus spoke it first to the destruction of Jerusalem. So that's, depending on how you calculate it, you got a couple generations there. 20 years is a generation. And so it was repeated from generation to generation, and the Christians, they knew Jesus' words. And so when it was time for the Jerusalem to be destroyed, the Christians knew Jesus' words, and they were ready. What happened was the Roman Empire was growing exceedingly frustrated with Jewish people. There was some Jews, they called themselves zealots, who were causing continual trouble with Romans, causing a lot of skirmishes and upsetting the peace of Rome. And so Rome finally decided to squelch these insurrectionists once and for all. And so Rome sent their armies to Palestine, and they invaded there in the northern parts first, and then made their way down to Jerusalem. And when the Roman armies got close to Jerusalem and surrounded the city, they made camp or made siege around the city of Jerusalem. And as they made camp, they set up these banners, which were banners to their gods, their pagan gods. Kind of similar to how nowadays, or at least in more recent history, like in European history, armies will take their flags into battle. Think of like pictures of the American Revolution or the Civil War, carrying the flags in battle, representing country. Well, in a similar fashion, these pagan armies back in those days would carry these banners. But these banners weren't just like flags representing their country, they were representing their gods. Because in the pagan mindset, their gods were limited. They weren't all powerful like the God of heaven that we believe. And so these pagan gods, they would be gods of a mountain, or gods of a river, or gods of the woods. And they were confined to a certain territory, the other limitations. And these gods, the only way that they could become more powerful is if their territory increased. And the pagans believed that when they would bring their gods into battle, they were bringing their gods with them, because otherwise their gods wouldn't be with them. They wanted their gods to be with them to give them success in battle. But also they believed that there was a symbiotic relationship between them and their gods, that if they won new territory, conquered new territory in battle, then they were increasing the reach of their gods, the territory of their gods. And so Romans, they brought banners for their gods, but as they surrounded Jerusalem, they entered a holy area, an area that was dedicated to the Lord. This goes all the way back to Nehemiah, 500 years prior. Nehemiah and Ezra, when they were rebuilding the city, building the temple, they started to disobey God once again. People from the surrounding nations that were coming and tried to start up trade with Jews who had returned from Babylonian captivity, that had returned to Jerusalem. And they were coming all the time, including on the Sabbath. And they were trying to trade, and some of the Jews were trading with these merchants on the Sabbath. And Nehemiah and others were like, guys, what are you doing? Why are you breaking the Sabbath? We went into captivity because we were disobeying God. We're going to go back into captivity because we're doing the same nonsense. And so what they decided was they created this territory, this circle of area around the temple and around the city of Jerusalem, that no one was allowed to enter that territory on the Sabbath with goods. The merchants were not allowed to go to that place, and it was a place that was dedicated to the Lord. And so this was the holy area of the temple. And so when these Roman armies entered Jerusalem, it was the first time that, since the initial destruction, since Nebuchadnezzar, first time that pagan armies had brought banners representing false gods and claiming the place that was dedicated to the temple and dedicated to God, claiming it for these pagan gods. And so it was an abomination, something that was despicable to God. It was an affront. It was blasphemy to the God of heaven. Say that it was these pagan gods' territory, God of heaven. And so it was an abomination that was foretelling desolation, destruction. And the Christians, when they saw those banners, they knew that it was time to listen to Jesus' words. Jesus said that when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, then you need to flee into the mountains. Which seems like bad advice from Jesus. No, just on the initial read here, because the very worst time to try and flee would be right when the armies show up and surround the city. How are you supposed to flee? But you see, Jesus is infinitely wise and knew exactly what he was telling them, because what happened was, as soon as the Roman armies surrounded the city of Jerusalem, the Jewish people that were inside the city retaliated. And soldiers from inside the city threw open the gates of the city, rushed out, and attacked the Roman camp, which was a very foolish thing to do because they were heavily outnumbered by these Roman armies. But the very strange thing, the thing that no one can really properly explain, it's almost like it's a miracle, almost like God's hand was in it, was that the Roman armies fled. They pulled back from as these Jewish soldiers attacked them. I mean, maybe it was just because it was unexpected, surprise attack, and so they didn't have time to really think about it. Maybe it was that they thought that there were more Jewish soldiers than there were. I mean, we don't really know, but for whatever reason, the Roman armies decided to pull back, and the Jewish soldiers even pushed them quite a few miles away from the city, and that meant that the area was completely open for any Christians who wanted to escape. And furthermore, the city of Jerusalem was left empty because all of the people, all the citizens there in Jerusalem, either were out trying to fight the Romans, or those who were left, the women and children and elderly people, they all had gone to the temple to pray for their soldiers, that they would have great victory against the Romans. And so the streets were empty. The gate, the front gate there was wide open, and the Christians were able to escape without anyone stopping them. Because if any of their fellow Jews had saw them trying to flee, they would have stopped them and been like, "Wait, what are you doing? Why are you trying to escape? We're trying to fight the Romans here. We need every help that we can." They would be looked at as traitors to their countrymen and punished probably. But because it all just worked out the way that God had predicted, Christians were able to escape. But they had a very short period of time, because you continue reading there. Jesus' words there in Matthew 24, continuing in verse 17. It says, flee to the mountains in verse 16. 17 says, let him who is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those with nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. So Christ here was saying that their time was short. They didn't have a lot of time. Just a moment that they had. They didn't have time to even go back and get anything. They had to flee immediately. And the reality was that it was a very short period of time. As soon as the Roman armies were pushed back by the Jewish soldiers, the Roman armies pushed them back and pushed the Jewish soldiers all the way back to the city gates, back inside. The Jews shut the gates, and the Roman armies surrounded the city once more. And that was the last time that anyone in that city had a chance to escape. There were many people who did try to escape, but they were all captured horribly as an example, so that others in the city would not try to escape. And in the end, everyone that was still in the city was destroyed. Only those who listened to the warning, who knew what he had said, excuse me, and followed his instructions, they were the ones who were saved. And we know all this because it's all very meticulously recorded. In fact, one of our best sources on what happened with the destruction of Jerusalem is a Jew named Josephus. He was a Jew who had been captured by the Roman armies before they surrounded Jerusalem, and so he was in the camp as a prisoner in the Roman camp, and he witnessed what happened there with the destruction of Jerusalem. He has very detailed, day-by-day accounts of what happened. So we know what happened. And Jesus' words were fulfilled, just like it said. But again, what happened in the destruction of Jerusalem was a lesson for us to understand what happened at the end of the world, before Jesus' second coming. What will happen? What is the abomination, desolation? Well, we have hints about it. Revelation 13. Turn in your Bibles. Revelation 13 tells us. Again, like I said, this is a very Adventist-coded sermon. I've preached about Revelation 13 before, earlier in the year. So if you have questions, ask me after. But essentially, there's two beasts in Revelation 13. They represent two religious political powers. And the first one is from during the time of the Middle Ages. The second beast, I believe, and have proofs that I can't get into now, but I'm happy to talk with you later. We have belief that is talking about our nation, that the second beast, Revelation 13, about the United States of America. And so in Revelation 13, and starting in verse 11, it says, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon." So he looks like a lamb. His name is Jesus. But he speaks like a dragon. Find in the previous chapter in Revelation 12, Satan. So this beast, our nation, it looks good. It looks like it has Christian values, but it speaks the devil. And it says, "And he exercises all the authority of the first beast's presence, causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, deadly wound." So we see this battle here over worship. That this second beast is causing the world to not worship God, rather to worship the first beast. Continues in verse 13. "This beast performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by these signs which he granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast," creating this similar structure to what we see in the Middle Ages, this breakdown of the separation of church and state. You didn't want to live during the time of the Middle Ages for a Bible-believing Christian, because things would not go well because of this mixture of church and state. So it's saying that the second beast creates a similar structure, and that it lives, it acts, it has power to do what happened during the Dark Ages. It says that image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast killed. And he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. And so we see here that what's predicted at the end of the world, what Jesus was warning us, was that there's going to be this another abomination, a setting up of a false god in place of where is rightfully the true God's place. And there's a battle here over worship. And without being able to get it all, you got to look at Revelation 14 and what it talks about worshiping God. There's a lot here. It was an Adventist-coded sermon. We've understood for 200 years that this is meaning that there is going to be forced worship, that our government is going to enact laws that are going to be contrary to God's laws, and to force a false worship on false terms. Yeah, that would be worshiping the first beast, or the ideals of the first beast. And those ideals are worshiping on a false day. The Bible says we're to worship on the Sabbath day, but that false beast, that first beast had said that the world is to worship on the first day of Sunday. And so we've long said that, we predicted that there are going to be Sunday laws. I'm way oversimplifying everything in this sermon. You can get into all the details about there's national Sunday law, there's going to be law here in our nation, and then it's going to later be an international Sunday law and all these kind of things. But I'm not going to get into the weeds right now. The important bit is that there's going to be laws that are an affront, abomination, to God's law and to his territory, because he claims our heart and our acts of worship as his own. And but this beast is going to try to replace that. Have this abomination that foretells coming desolation. This time not of the temple, Jerusalem, but destruction of the world. And Jesus says, going back to Matthew 24, Jesus predicts. I already read it, but I'll read it again. Predicts that when this abomination happens, you need to get out of Dodge because something bad is coming. Again, in Matthew 24, and I'll just start again at verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. So if what we're predicting here is true, what we've been interpreting the Bible prophecy for the past 200 years is true, and that there's going to be these Sunday laws, we see them happen. We know that, verse 16, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. Anything that will slow you down, right? For then there will, for why? Why do you have to flee? Why do you have to be quick? Because it says, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has never been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor never shall be. And Jesus here, he's referring back to the words of Daniel. If you go to Daniel chapter 12, flip quickly over to Daniel chapter 12. When he says that there will be this tribulation as terrible as the world has never seen and never will see again. Quoting Daniel. Daniel chapter 12. Last chapter there. Starting in verse 1. It says, at that time Michael shall stand up. Again, this is an Adventist coded sermon. I'm not going to explain, but Michael, we believe, is Jesus. Don't believe that Michael is an angel. He is an archangel. He is a ruler of the angels. He is not a created being. He is God. Always been God. Always will be. Part of the Trinity. But Jesus didn't get the name Jesus until he came to this earth. His parents were told by the angel Gabriel to call his name Jesus. Before that, he had to have some other name. That is Michael here. So, okay, there's the long thing. There's the short thing about Michael. If you have questions, talk to me after. So this is saying that Jesus is going to stand up. What does he stand up? Why was he sitting down before? Well, it's because going back to Daniel 8 and Daniel 7, judgment scene that is happening. And this is the end of that judgment. This is Michael standing up. This is Jesus standing up because he is getting ready to come back for the second coming. It's also the end of probationary time. So Michael stands up, says, that great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, time of great tribulation, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. Notice what it says. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame, lasting contempt. So again, you'll remember there's 3 things that I said have to happen before Jesus returns that have been predicted. The gospel goes to the whole world. Right? There's also the government sets up this these false laws that are contrary to God's laws, and then there is great tribulation. Now, thank you. And so, what does this tribulation look like? Well, we've never seen anything like it. It's the worst thing that will ever happen. So we have no idea what it looks like. Some have thought maybe it's nuclear holocaust. Maybe. We don't know. We don't know what it will look like, but it will be terrible. And it's predicted, Revelation 15 and 16, as the 7 last plagues. And those chapters, Revelation 15 and 16, it's an absolutely horrifying time. Apocalyptic, the true destruction of the world. Now, at this point, I want to stress that, again, how we have often talked about this, I think, brings up a lot of anxiety. A lot of people are worried about the future, worried about these, thinking, well, if I miss the sign, don't flee. What does that even mean? What does it mean to flee to the mountains? Does that mean we've got to find the nearest mountain? There's Rib Mountain and Wausau. We don't really have a lot of mountains right around here in Stevens Point. What does that mean? I don't think that it means that you have to go to a mountain. Remember, Jesus is talking to his disciples about 2 different events. And he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains. It's on a mountain, Mount Zion, but it's also surrounded by mountains. So he's saying that, yes, those in Judea, those in Jerusalem, they needed to flee the mountains. But I don't think he necessarily means that at the end of the world, his people find a mountain. There will be people all over the world in different places that aren't near mountains. I think what he is saying is to get out of those populated areas, get away from the centers and get to deserted places, because that's what he was really telling at the Jerusalem. Get away from the city, get out to where you can be hidden in the wilderness. So I don't think it means that we all need to be like, okay, we're going to go to the certain mountain in Canada and that's our meetup spot. And no. He's just saying, just flee in general. But yeah, what if you miss that or something? Or what if what about this great tribulation? This is going to be the end of the world. Are we going to be okay? What if I have a child? He said, pray that it's not when you're with child. I think of my own children. How are we going to handle with Conrad being 1 year old there and David being 3? If the end of the world, we don't know when it's going to happen. It could happen any day. But will we be ready? So there's a lot of anxiety to this, and also alongside that, there's a lot of people that try to anticipate the trouble, and not just Adventists. There's a lot of people in the world today that think, and there's a lot of preppers, a lot of people trying to prepare for the end of the world, and there's a lot of anxiety that comes along. But I want to stress that there are terrible things that happen in the world before Jesus returns. But Jesus said that those are not signs of the end. There's going to be wars and rumors. There could be a nuclear holocaust. That's not the end of the world. It's hard to imagine that there could be something worse. But you read through Revelation 15 and 16, and it's bad. I mean, it's really bad what happens there. So maybe there could be something that happens. And we're not guaranteed that we won't suffer persecution in this world. Jesus said, you will suffer tribulation in the world, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. But when it comes to the events of the end, when it comes to the 7 last plagues, I don't think we need to have the anxiety that we often have. It's called 7 last plagues it's a reference to 10 plagues in Egypt at the Exodus, second book of the Bible, the Exodus, story of the Exodus. And of the 10 plagues that fell upon Egypt, the first 3 were different from the last 7. And how they were different was that the first 3 fell on everyone. It fell on the Egyptians and the Israelites, God's people. But the last 7 only affected the Egyptians. It didn't affect any of the Israelites. They were protected, the city of Goshen. And so while it is called the 7 last plagues, this time of great tribulation, it also has another name in the Bible called Jacob's time. And for God's people, it's going to be Jacob's time. And Jacob, his time of trouble was when he was heading back home with his family, and he was going to be meeting his brother Esau that tried to kill him in the past. And he didn't know if Esau still hated him. wanted to see him dead. And so here he's going back to see his twin brother, and it's the night before he's going to meet his brother, and he thinks this might be my last day on earth. I might see my end here tomorrow. Yeah, and he's worried about it and stressing about it. There, he can't fall asleep, and so he's standing late at night there by this river, and an assailant attacks him. Someone attacks him in the night, starts wrestling with him. And he thinks it's an assassin sent by his brother Esau. He thinks this is the end. So he's fighting for his life. And says they fought all night, Jacob and this attacker. But Jacob realizes in the morning that it's not actually an attacker, but that it's God. You see, Jacob, he thought he was toast. He thought that it was the end. But he had actually never been safer in his life because he had never been closer to God in his whole life. He had God in his very arms. God had him in his very arms. And he had never been more protected. But he didn't realize that. He didn't know that. The Bible doesn't go into details, but I kind of think it was maybe Jacob that attacked the person first. I don't know if God really intended to attack him, but he's like, okay, we're going to have a wrestling match here. And I imagine Jesus is probably like how my dad was when I was a kid, and how I now with my kids like play wrestling with them. I could easily beat them. It's like my dad could have easily beat us when we were 4 years. But it's not about winning the fight. It's just about having fun, right? And so Jesus could have easily Jacob from the first second of the fight, but instead he's just kind of like, okay, let's have some fun tumble here together until you figure out what's going on, Jacob. But anyway, but the point is that it was not a stressful. It was not a time that Jacob needed to be. He was stressed, but he didn't need to, because he was safe. Nothing bad was going to happen to him. And in the same sense, God is predicting here that nothing as bad is going to happen to his people, because as we read in Daniel 12, what does it say when this time of tribulation happens? It says that God's people are delivered. And so we don't need to worry for the I want to read a quote here this is from Ellen White, founders of our church, who we believe to be a prophet. And she writes in one of her books, Maranatha, page 270, she writes about that end of the world and that tribulation. She says, in the days of fierce trial, Christ will say, come, my people, enter into thy chambers, quoting Isaiah, and shut thy doors about thee, hide thyself as it were for a little moment, until the indignation be overpassed. At 26:20. Now, what are the chambers in which they are to hide? Have they been prepping? Have they been building an underground bunker to prepare for this nuclear holocaust or whatever it is? Is that where God is telling them to hide? No. It says they are the protection of Christ and his angels. That is the chamber. It's not a physical chamber. It's a spiritual chamber, spiritual protection. The people of God are not at this time all in one place, not all on one mountain, right? They've all went to hide to. They are in different companies and in all parts of the earth. I saw the saints leaving the cities and villages and associating together in companies and living in the most solitary places. Angels provide them food and water, while the wicked were suffering from hunger and thirst. During the night, a very impressive scene passed before me. There seemed to be greater confusion and conflict of armies. A messenger from the Lord stood before me and said, call your household, I will lead you, follow me. So she, in this vision, it's like she's with the people at the time, and there's an angel that comes and says, come with me. Now, there's nowhere in the Bible where Jesus says to prepare, to be a prepper for the end of the world. In fact, quite the opposite, because again, he said that even if you have prepared, you're not going to have time to get those preparations. Now, he said that you don't go back up to get your coat if you left it upstairs or something, or don't go back to the house if you're out in the field. There's no time. You just got to run. You just got to flee. But he's seeing here that angels will be with us to guide us. It says, he led me down a dark passage through a forest, then through the clefts of mountains, and said, here you are safe. There were others who had been led to this retreat. The heavenly messenger said that this time of trouble has come as a thief in the night. As the Lord warned you, it would come. This angel's quoting Jesus' words in Matthew 24 that we didn't read, but he says that later in Matthew 24 that his second coming will be as a thief in the night, right? It'll become quickly, catch you unawares. It says, in the time of trouble, just before the coming of Christ, Righteous will be preserved through the ministration of heavenly angels. There will be no security for the transgressor of God's law. Angels cannot then protect those who are disregarding one of the divine precepts. In the closing period of Earth's history, the Lord will work mightily in behalf of those who stand steadfastly for the right. In the midst of the time of trouble just as has not been since there was a nation, his chosen ones will stand unmoved. Satan, with all the hosts of evil, cannot destroy the weakest of God's saints. Angels that excel in strength will protect them. In their behalf, Jehovah will reveal himself as God of gods, able to save to the uttermost those who have put their trust in him. Folks, I don't know what the end of the world will look like. I don't know when the end of the world will be. Not told. No, not the hour. Second coming. But have these prophecies from the Bible. Have this heritage. Been told what still has to happen. And we're told to watch. Watch and be wise. But are we told to worry? Prep? No. What are we told to do? Been commissioned, right? We've been commissioned to spread the gospel, share the good news of love, grace. Then he's coming back. Glorious day that will be.